I was always a healthy person, or at least I thought I was. But when I contracted a strange disease, everything changed. It started with a headache that wouldn't go away, followed by a fever that kept getting higher and higher. I knew something was wrong, but I never expected what was to come. At first, I tried to tough it out, thinking it was just a common cold or flu. But as the days passed, my condition worsened. I was having trouble breathing, my body ached all over, and I had a constant sense of dread that I couldn't shake off. One night, I woke up drenched in sweat, feeling like I was suffocating. My heart was racing, and I couldn't catch my breath. I stumbled out of bed, trying to make my way to the bathroom, but my legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air, feeling like I was drowning. That was when I knew something was seriously wrong. I managed to crawl to my phone and dial 911. The ambulance arrived quickly, but by that point I was barely conscious. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital bed, hooked up to all kinds of machines. The doctors told me that I had contracted a rare, unknown disease. They didn't know what it was, where it came from, or how to cure it. For days, I lay in that hospital bed, writhing in agony, while the doctors tried everything they could think of to save me. But nothing worked. The disease was too powerful, too virulent. It was like something out of a nightmare. As my condition worsened, I began to experience strange hallucinations. I saw things that weren't there, heard voices that no one else could hear. I felt like I was losing my mind. And then, one night I saw it. A dark figure looming at the foot of my bed, staring at me with glowing red eyes. It was like something out of a horror movie. I tried to scream, but my throat was too dry. I tried to move, but my body was too weak. The figure leaned closer, its breath hot on my face. I could feel its cold, clammy skin against mine. And then it spoke, a voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You're mine," it said. "You belong to me now." I tried to fight it, but it was too strong. It enveloped me, pulling me deeper into darkness. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a different room. I was no longer in the hospital. I was somewhere else entirely. The walls were covered in a thick layer of mold, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. I could hear the sound of dripping water somewhere in the distance. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I was too weak, too sick. I looked down at my hands, and they were covered in strange black veins. It was like the disease had taken over my body entirely. As I lay there, staring at the decaying walls, I realized that I was trapped in this dark, twisted place with no way out. The disease had claimed me, body and soul, and that's when I knew that my nightmare was far from over. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and the sky was dark with the promise of a storm. I had just returned from a long day at work, exhausted and ready to collapse into my bed. But as soon as I walked through the door of my apartment, something felt off. The silence was overwhelming, and there was a musty smell that hadn't been there before. I ignored it and went to take a shower, hoping to wash off the day's grime. But as the water cascaded down my body, I felt something strange happening. My skin started to itch, and I noticed a rash forming on my arms and chest. I panicked and jumped out of the shower, only to realize that the rash had spread all over my body. I tried to ignore it and went to bed, hoping that a good night's sleep would make it go away. But as the night wore on, I felt worse and worse. My body was burning up with a fever, and I was plagued by terrible nightmares. I woke up in a cold sweat, feeling like something was crawling under my skin. The next few days were a blur. I was too sick to leave my bed, and the rash had spread to cover my entire body. I tried calling for help, but my voice was hoarse and barely audible. I couldn't eat, and my body was racked with pain. As the days went on, I started to notice something strange happening to my body. My skin was becoming translucent, and I could see strange veins pulsing underneath. My hair was falling out in clumps, and my nails were turning black. I was becoming something else entirely. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a voice whispering in my ear. It was a guttural, inhuman sound that filled me with terror. I tried to scream, but my throat was so raw that no sound came out. The voice continued to whisper, and I felt something cold and slimy slithering over my body. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear. But when I finally regained control of my body, I saw that something had changed. My skin was no longer translucent, but instead had turned a sickly yellow color. My eyes had become milky white, and my fingers had elongated into sharp claws. I was no longer human. I don't know how long I wandered the streets, searching for something to ease the hunger that burned inside of me. Everywhere I went, people recoiled in fear at the sight of me. I was a monster, something out of a nightmare. But then, one night, I stumbled upon a group of people who didn't run away. They welcomed me with open arms, offering me food and shelter. They were like me, changed by the same disease that had taken hold of my body. It was a relief to be around others who understood my pain. We spent our days hiding from the rest of the world, trying to find a way to stop the disease from spreading. But it was no use. The disease had already taken over our bodies, and there was no going back. In the end, we were forced to live in isolation, away from the rest of the world. We became a cautionary tale, a warning of the dangers of unknown diseases. But to those of us who had been affected, we were a family, united by the strange disease that had changed us forever. It was a normal day for me, just like any other. I was walking down the street, lost in my thoughts, when I felt something hit my face. I looked up to see a man walking past me, coughing uncontrollably. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But little did I know that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine. A few days after that incident, I started to feel unwell. I had a fever and a persistent cough. I assumed it was just a cold, and I tried to push through it, but the coughing became worse, and I started to feel weaker and weaker. I went to the doctor, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. They ran tests and gave me medication, but nothing seemed to work. I was losing weight rapidly, and my body was covered in rashes. It was as if my body was slowly shutting down. Eventually, I was referred to a specialist who ran more tests. That's when they discovered that I had contracted a rare, unknown disease. They told me that they had never seen anything like it before, and that there was no cure. The only thing they could do was try to manage my symptoms and make me as comfortable as possible. I was devastated. I couldn't believe that I had contracted an unknown disease, and there was nothing anyone could do to help me. I felt alone and scared, not knowing what the future held. I was quarantined in a hospital room, with no visitors allowed. I spent my days lying in bed, watching the clock tick away. I had nothing to do but think, and my thoughts were consumed by fear and uncertainty. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. My body was slowly wasting away, and my mind was slipping. I was in constant pain, barely able to breathe, and barely able to think. But then, something strange started to happen. I began to notice that I had developed some kind of strange ability. I could sense things that others couldn't, and I could move things with my mind. I was scared and amazed all at once. I tried to tell the doctors about what was happening, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was delirious from the disease, and they dismissed my claims as nonsense. But I knew that something was happening to me, and I was determined to figure out what it was. I started to experiment with my abilities, trying to understand them and control them. One day, I managed to move an object across the room with my mind. It was a breakthrough, and I knew that I had to keep going. I started to train myself, honing my abilities and pushing myself to new limits. As time went on, my abilities grew stronger and stronger. I could read minds, move objects with ease, and even control the elements. I felt like a superhero, with powers beyond my wildest dreams. But as my abilities grew, so did the danger. I attracted unwanted attention, and soon, people were after me, trying to capture me and harness my powers for their own gain. I was on the run, constantly looking over my shoulder, trying to stay one step ahead of those who wanted to exploit me. But I was determined to use my powers for good, to help others and make a difference in the world. In the end, I realized that the disease that had once threatened to end my life had given me a new one, with abilities beyond my wildest dreams. And even though my life would never be the same, I knew that I had a purpose, and I was ready to embrace it.